we go. Okay, well, welcome everybody to week 5, session 5 of the Surviving High Prices webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about integrated crop and livestock systems, along with some hay production things, with the title of that being how not to need a hay baler. So looking forward to that talk. Today with us, we have Ken Kelley from Auburn and also Dr. Leann Dillard from Auburn. And then we have again Matt Fischer from Clemson, and they are going to be our presenters today. And like every week, if you have a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute yourself and feel free to ask that. But there will be plenty of times for questions and discussion at the end. So with that, Ken, I'll let you share your screen and we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for putting this all together. Now, whether I can actually share the correct screen or not will be interesting to see. It worked very well just a second ago. We'll see if it works this time. Can you guys see my screen now?
Looks good.
All right, very good. Well, let's jump into this. I'm gonna start out this presentation, and then Dr. Dillard's gonna come through and clean up anything that I say wrong. I get to talk about the econ side of things, and she's gonna talk the fun production stuff to kind of end it out. So we're gonna talk about and by the way, Dr. Nate Smith was also on this team, and we appreciate his input as well as Dr. Wendiam Sawadgo. They were busy. They couldn't attend today. Wendiam had another engagement he had to be a part of, but thanks to those guys for helping to put this presentation together. It's a team effort by all means. We always work as a team, and we're mighty proud of that. So we're going to talk a little bit about integrating crop and livestock systems, and we're going to talk about it from the standpoint of why would we want to do this, and why is now the time to do this, and kind of what are some of the things we would consider as we go through and try to integrate these systems. So why now? I mean, we've talked about it over the years, but there seems to be a lot of interest right now in integrating some livestock back into our cropping systems. We'll talk a little bit about why that is going forward. Some of the profit potential. We never say we're going to make profit. There's opportunity there. We're going to discuss some of those going forward, and kind of some of the stumbling blocks that you might see, some of the roadblocks, and some of the little intricacies you'll need to think about as you go forward if you want to instigate some of this on a farm. So, and Dr. Dillard to touch on some of those. So before I really get going, though, a quick plug for Southern Ag Today. If you're not signed up to that, please sign up to that. Max Runge will have an article out very shortly that's going to sound a whole lot like what our presentation is going to sound like today, that he and I put together, tied back into a contract grazing publication that he and I, Dr. Andrew Griffiths, did, mainly Andrew. But it'll tie back to that. But if you're not a member of that, join Southern Ag Today. Just go in there and subscribe to that. Some great articles that come through there. I've written for them. Hannah's written for them. I'm sure Matthew has. All of us have. So join that and be a part of that Southern Ag Today group. Now, why in the world would we want to talk about integrating crop systems with livestock? Well, the number one reason, if you look at our funnel chart here, which is a requirement as far as I'm concerned for any good economist, you got to have a number of charts on your presentation. So the really interesting lines there are the blue line and the orange line. The blue line shows your crop production prices. They are not doing well right now. If you hadn't been keeping up with crop production prices, especially the crops we grow here in the South, cotton, peanuts, corn, beans, that kind of thing, they are not doing well right now. But the other side of that is, of course, your livestock prices, which is your orange prices, which are doing the best that we've ever seen them. Okay, a lot of us that were economists back in 2014, livestock economists, remember saying, enjoy these prices while they're here. You'll never see them again. And we were wrong. We saw them again, and they've outpaced them. So right now there's opportunity on the livestock side for the guys that are really struggling on the row crop side, and maybe this offers them some opportunity. Now, I would say this across the board pretty much, as far as our row crop guys go, it's a struggle right now. If you look at cash receipts compared to last year, they're going to be down for just about everything. Corn, beans, even fruit and veggies, wheat. Cotton doesn't show it, but I fully expect cotton to be back. Right now at 60-cent cotton, you can't be having a lot of receipts coming in right now. So it's going to be a tough year for those guys, and as such, they're looking for any opportunity that they can find to maybe add some value, add some revenue at some point, maybe help cash flow a little bit. And they've already got a lot of the resources in place. There's definitely some that they'll need to think about adding, some fencing and stuff like that if it's not in place. But a lot of the stuff's already there. Their soil fertility is already good. They already know how to grow plants, so they can grow forages. A lot of them already plant cover crops, so we'll talk about that too. So some definite opportunity to integrate cropping systems there. I think this graph shows a pretty little picture of the real difference between what cropping prices and what livestock prices have done. That top line being your livestock price, if you look just from 24 to now, and kind of where we see it going, certainly well outpacing our crop prices. So there's opportunity there, and there's some real need for opportunity for our row crop guys. So that's kind of the why and the why now. Now, I will say this, there is some risk involved with this, though. There's always risk involved with anything we do, and we always want to talk about that and how to mitigate some of that risk, but we have to acknowledge there's some risk involved. That's prices for 4 to 5 weight calves out of Georgia, number one, number two, steer prices. Those are high, which means if you're buying cattle to put on your farm, there's some expense to that. When you're talking about a truckload of cattle being $120,000 plus, that's a lot of risk just to get them there. And that kind of expense, we really have to make sure that we're doing all the little things right and we're getting the right kind of cattle in there. It doesn't take much death loss on that kind of cattle to really mitigate any chance you have of making money on those things. So we want to acknowledge that there's definitely some risk going in, which leads to, and Dr. Dillard to touch on some things to talk about on contracts and stuff like that. Need to have all that stuff kind of figured going, and Andrew talked about it last week too. Have that stuff kind of figured out going in. Are the calves backgrounded, where they're coming from? Who's going to absorb the death loss? Who's going to, because it's very, very important with these kind of prices. We got now the good side of it is high calf prices on heavies are also really good too. So if you come out the other end of it and you keep them all alive and put some weight on them, really good opportunity to make some money. Okay. This might also tie in on the risk side of things back to the contract grazing. And we're speaking this week, you could either own your own calves or you could contract graze, and the principles are the same here. So, but know that if you're going into it from the risk side of things, it's pretty tough right now as far as the price of calves goes. But there's profit potentials if you own your calves. And there's also profit potential for those guys that are willing to graze with you. So picking a good contract grazer and having that understanding going in is kind of important. Now, just think about where we're at from an industry. Cattle prices at an all-time high, and we get asked all the time, I'm sure Hannah and these other guys do too, how long will these prices last? And any good economist is going to tell you it just depends. And that's the same thing I'm going to tell you. But we do think we've got some support for a while. I mean, there's no reason to think we're going to lose that anytime soon. But increased risk because of high prices. Okay, there is a risk there. Traditional row crop prices are as low as we've seen them. My goodness, you're talking about corn trading at $4. You're talking about cotton at 60 cents. That's the same prices we had in the 80s and 90s. So, and certainly expenses are high for both of them. So you've got increased expenses both sides. So you might as well try to mitigate some of the losses you might have on fertility or land laying fallow by getting some grazing off of it. So it's just a good opportunity and a good timing for us. Now, some things to think about. A lot of our guys are already planting cover crops, across the Southeast. And I'll show you a graph in just a second. It kind of shows that a little bit better. But a lot of them are already doing it, whether they're grazing or not. And the reason is because of the benefit they're going to get from the way it builds their soils, it holds moisture, ripping back into that just does so much better as far as their production goes. So they're already doing it, and typically it's kind of a deal to improve soil moisture. And it might be also getting paid for it too. We have gotten paid, although you're not getting paid for any federal payments right this minute. But over time, we've gotten paid for doing some of those practices too. So that may be why some of our guys are already doing it. Now, I'll say this, in the Southeast, we're probably ahead of a lot of places on cover crops. Okay, we're going to do that anyway. It really fits well into our system. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that these cover crops are ready for us, and Dr. Dillard can talk about this, not ready for us to just go out there and throw them out there on these cover crops as we've got them planted. We might need to be a little more selective on varieties. We might need to be a little more selective on rates, okay? Cover crop rate may not be the same as a grazing rate. 25 pounds of wheat might do for cover crop, but you're going to need a little more of something else, for grazing purposes. So fertility might not be what it needs to be as far as cover crop goes for grazing, but they're already in the process. They're already doing it. It's already in the system. So it's not really that big of a jump to think that a lot of these places where we've already got 25 or better percent higher that are planting cover crops, some of these guys might want to integrate some grazing into that. So some things to think about, if they're already planting cover crops, they know this, but if they're not, if you're going to use cover crops, there's an expense to that. I mean, yes, there's benefit on the backside too. And we talk about that as well. Usually we're going to offset any of our losses just by the improvement on crop productions, right? But there's also opportunities to improve it by grazing, but there is a cost for that. Seed is not cheap. Fertilizer is not cheap. Diesel fuel is not cheap. None of that stuff is cheap. There's a cost for it, but the benefits a lot of times outweigh those costs. So, there's also another cost that may be associated with it. If they hadn't been grazing for a while, there's certainly an expense for fencing, and we've seen all kind of different fencing scenarios that can go out there, from electric fence to permanent fencing to the grazing collars. There's all kind of different ways to do it, but for whatever you do, there is an expense for that. So we want to absolutely be aware of that as we go forward, that yes, there's an expense just for getting seed in the ground. There's also an expense for having a fence around them that'll hold them, and that's if you've never been in the cattle business, especially with stockers, need a pretty stout fence to be able to hold those things. You don't want to chase them up and down I-29, I-25, or I-10 or I-65. That's not a good scenario. So having a good fence around them, being able to move them, being able to catch them at some point. I've seen a lot of guys graze calves over the years. Some of them row crop guys, and they don't take into account, hey, at some point we've got to put them back on that trailer. So having a working facility where you can actually capture those things at the end and put them back on the trailer and collect your money is extremely important. So some of these things have to be considered going in. How much are we going to invest? Who's going to invest? And as far as like facilities and all, it could be the person providing the calves, or it could be the person grazing the calves, and all that just needs to be worked out ahead of time. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Dr. Dillard and let her talk a little bit about how the crops need to work together to make you money. Dr. Dillard, feel free to wave your hand if I don't change the slides as I need to.
Thanks, Ken. So I'll just throw this out here. I'm not an economist. I'm an agronomist with maybe an animal scientist, depending on the day. So, but I've been working in this space now for about 15 years, and I've really been pushing, I think a lot of our animal guys, have been on board with this. A lot of our row crop guys haven't. And so unfortunately, right now is a good time. I'm getting a lot of calls from guys interested in doing this because in the past, they haven't seen the economic advantage. So from the cropping system, the benefits here are really, we're kind of ramping up this nutrient cycling. So when we use cover crops, whether they're grazed or not, one of the benefits is we're able to mine some nutrients, some fertility out, bring it back up. As those plants degrade, those nutrients then get put back in the cycle and become available for those subsequent cash crops. Well, livestock actually speed up that system, but we also know can be some negative benefits or consequences of livestock. So that, how do we want to handle that? So we want to look at how all of this works together and look at how we can provide those nutrients and even supplementation to those livestock to put the system into those sustainable cover crop systems. So one of the biggest challenges, and Ken did a really good job talking about a lot of the risk management, and there's a ton of risk management. That is his job, and I appreciate that a lot. But one of the other hurdles we have, and I'll be honest, again, I'm not an economist, so I'm looking at this from a practical side, is that those lease contracts. So a lot of times when we're doing this, we have guys that are stocker producers. We have several in West Alabama that are looking for more and more land every year because, as Ken said, while there's a lot of risk because the cattle prices are high, there's a lot of reward if we can put some weight on them, right? And so trying to figure out how to work with those crop producers. What does that contract look like? I know I've worked with some of my counterparts in other states of trying to get some kind of templates out there just to talk about what is that? Are we being paid per acre, per head, or per gain? For our stocker systems, a lot of times it's per gain. Because that is where you can make a lot of money, but it also puts the pressure on the landowner or the manager to make sure those cattle are actually gaining. Now, with some of our cow-calf systems, a lot of time that is per head per month, because really, we're not really focusing on gain. It's just giving those animals enough food to maintain themselves. So that goes to that. And then in more generic systems, a lot of times, like for example, our perennial systems, a lot of times then we're looking at that acre per month kind of rental system. But for cover crops, really, to be really profitable is that cost per pound of gain. And also that needs to go in there is the cover crop seeding planting rate. So as Ken mentioned, the seeding rate's higher. So it's about 2 to 3 times what it is just for straight cover crops. There may be some other things we need to put in there, some other forages that might be a little bit more expensive that we want to use just to extend the grazing system. Also, the fertility is higher. So while a lot of my cover crop guys might put out 10 or 15 or even up to 30 pounds of nitrogen to get those started. In these systems, I'm usually putting out 90 to 120 pounds of nitrogen over the season just to keep that maintaining and getting our forage production. So as he mentioned facilities, so working facilities is one, but also water. He also mentioned fencing. Most of our crops, fields no longer have a permanent fencing, and temporary electric fencing is wonderful, and we use it to subdivide our pastures, but I'm not comfortable with those being our perimeter fence. So there are some temporary, but more, I would say, stable or hardcore options when we look at perimeter fencing, but that is a cost, and many times if we're working with a producer that's a row crop guy, they're going to want that not to be permanent. One, there's extra costs in making it permanent, but also they don't want to be restricted on where they can turn around their combines, their planting equipment. So they're going to want that to come down at the end of the field. So you kind of have to get a little creative in terms of making it cost feasible, but also working with that row crop producer. Because when it comes down to it, even the way prices are, the cash crop is more important and the cattle are secondary. And that's just a concept we're just going to have to get used to, right? So other considerations are, what are those cover crops going to look like? Like I mentioned and Ken said, they're going to be different. Planting and termination are two very important things. What is, if the producer is already using cover crops, what objectives or what are their goals in using those? So I'm going to show you some data here in just a second on a project that we did, and in that was in a cotton peanut rotation. And one of the important objectives of that was weed suppression. So one of the things we measured was looking at how much biomass was standing at termination. In some producers, that's not a goal. So, might be able to graze it as low as possible and not really worry about regrowth, because having some amount of cover crop termination cover is not important to them. But also, what do those species look like and what's the cost? How it's going to be planted. So I have some guys being really creative. I have a producer out in West Alabama that is he was using a plane and now he's using a drone to put cover crops on prior to defoliation of cotton. Because and in our system, we're waiting till after harvest to plant, and that we're sacrificing 30 to 45 days of grazing by doing that. In the system that in West Alabama producer is doing, he's able to get that month of grazing back, which can be, if we're looking at stocker systems where they're gaining on these systems, and you'll see some data in a second, consistently over the season, I'm getting 2 to 3 pounds per head per day. You're talking about 30 days is 90 pounds of potential gain per animal. And in today's market, that's a ton of money. So being cognizant of that, I've seen some work coming out in peanuts saying that, because, in peanuts, we're digging them up. Can we do it? But there's a group, I believe in Florida, that's actually shown that you can, in fact, broadcast on your cover crops prior to digging, and then you're able to still get those up even when you dig the peanuts, because I've always been concerned that it would bury them too deep. Probably when we're looking at our cover crop seed mix, as I mentioned, for cover crops, a lot of times guys go with straight cereal rye. Again, their goal is produce the most biomass as possible. We need to be a little bit more strategic when we're looking at grazing those. Rye, for example, is very early season. If we're looking at continuing that, it's going to play out depending on the variety by the end of January here in the Deep South. And really that I'm sacrificing about 45 to 60 days of grazing. So by adding in something like oat, we're going to avoid ryegrass, but adding another small grain, also potentially looking at adding in a legume like crimson clover to help kind of balance that nutrition for those animals, but that increases the cost of seeding, right? But we also want to make sure we avoid toxins. For example, certain herbicides are not labeled for use in animals. So that is also a concern. If we're not today, this is outside the scope of today, but when we talk about grazing crop residues or failed crops, that's another thing. Many of our crop herbicides are not labeled for animal consumption. So we get into some potential issues there. Obviously in extension, we're not regulatory, but we always have to make sure our producers are aware that, there are many fungicides used in peanut production that I know my guys use annual peanut hay all the time, but we're not going to talk about what's used for peanut production. So there's something to keep in mind that they need to be aware of, just because that is something that might come up in the future. Because again, we're not regulatory, but we just need to make them aware. Also, there's certain cover crop species that would have potential toxicity, like hairy vetch being one of them, even though we graze hairy vetch all the time. So cattle considerations, one thing, and I see this again across the board when I'm talking to producers that are leasing land, whether it be for row crops or for just leasing land, is making sure that that land condition stays where they want it to be. So what is the allowable stocking rate? Because, if you don't have any guardrails set up, someone is going to potentially be taking advantage of that. We know that our guys, farmers are great people, but, you always want to have some guardrails. So typically, and I have some numbers down there, but we're typically talking about for steers, we're looking at, maybe 2 to 3 steers per acre for a short period of time. Obviously, rotational management helps us with that. If we're talking cow-calf, we're usually going to be talking of probably one animal per acre, just as a way we're not degrading that land. Who's going to be responsible for cattle management on a day-to-day basis? So we do a lot of lease contracts actually on our stations so that we can do these projects. We use lease cattle. And in that case, we are responsible for day-to-day management, death losses. If there's death losses, we take responsibility. That's in our contract. However, we're getting paid per pound of gain. So the risk on that side is higher, but the return is greater, as we always see in economics, right? The higher the risk, the higher return. And then also deadlines on livestock removed. So I think the next slide is some data, or in just a second is some data. And that project, we were actually trying to get down to that information on when livestock is removed. So that can be determined based on how much biomass is on the field, which is kind of abstract. For this project, we were trying to work with NRCS to basically find a calendar date. That becomes and yeah, thanks, Ken, for go ahead and changing that, because this kind of goes in this conversation. So this was a project that was funded by Alabama NRCS. At the time, grazing cover crops was not does not qualify for EQIP. There are other states that they do. So Ken talked a little bit about cost share for cover crops. There is something that you will need to investigate state to state what is allowed, because in Alabama, it is now allowed because of this project, but in some states it may not be. So we don't want them going into this thinking they're going to get money for the cover crops, and then it ends up being taken away because they were grazing it. But so the one thing NRCS wanted was a date, right? They work in very practical. So we need to say, hey, we need to tell them what date they have to come off. And in our system, we were kind of looking at the idea of easy February, March, or April, and we use the mid dates of each month. And that's the consequence. The shorter the grazing period, the less potential for animal gain. The longer the grazing period, we have more gain, but potential negative effects on the environment. And being this was NRCS, soil health was a major factor. The second factor being cash crop performance, and the third factor being animal gains and potential economics on that. So in this project, we did this for 4 years. And we were looking at, like I said, so we have a non-grazed cover crop system. So this was cereal rye, oat, black oat, excuse me. We have another project now that's using oat. So we have cereal rye, black oat, crimson clover, and then a turnip rapeseed hybrid called T-Raptor. So really focusing on early season grazing, and then them kind of petering out in April. And this was done in South Alabama at our Wiregrass Research Station. So looking just at our animals, that our treatments at animals, what we saw was that over the season, we did have a little bit more biomass standing at any time when we took cattle out in mid-February. As you can imagine, there was potential for regrowth, but we always maintained well above 1,500 pounds of dry matter per acre. And we typically say to benefit a cover crop, we want, at least 1,000 pounds of standing biomass any time. So we easily met that. We did see that the longer the animals were on there, that their final body weight was higher. And surprisingly, because I expected a lot of times these animals, if you're getting hot stockers that are kind of high-tempered and not been around a lot of people, they'll go off grazing when you first move them. It's a very typical thing. So I was surprised to see that our average daily gains were not significantly different. There is a bit of a range there, but still, if I'm getting 2.5 pounds per head per day, I'm pretty happy with that, right? But when it really comes down to it, and the way I see the success of these systems is pounds of gain per acre. So that's what we're getting paid on, right? Is gain per acre, not individual animal performance. So that takes into account all the pounds that all 3 animals. So we use 3 stocker animals and then adjusted our stocking rate as necessary to put and takes, but we didn't do that a lot. because 3 seemed to be about right in this system. And it was about 3/4 of a hectare, I think, is the size of the pasture, but these are all adjusted to acres. Then we had a wide range, 178 pounds all the way to 368 pounds on that mid-April removal date, right? Because they're on there 2 extra months. Forage allowance was pretty consistent on these systems. So forage allowance is pounds of dry matter available per pound of body weight. It's a concept we use in forages quite a bit because it's a little bit more accurate than stocking distance and stocking rate because it takes into forage biomass yield. So in these systems, you can push them to 1-to-1. And that seems crazy, but you can push them really hard. Our stocking rate was about 1.4 to 1.3 head per acre per day, or head per acre, excuse me. And then grazing days just takes into account how many animals are out there in the grazing season. It's a multiplication of that. So as you can imagine, and that last number should not be 3,161. I just see that it'd be 316. It would be amazing. We got 3,000 grazing days. But I apologize, I mistyped there. It should be 316. But again, as you go through the season. So our grazing day, actual length of grazing system went from 36 to 72 on average for each year. Obviously, each year we started grazing at a little bit different time based on the weather conditions. But when it comes down to it, I mentioned in these systems, regardless of what the cash crop value is, that's what's going to rue the day. So when we looked at it, and the reason we did this project was really looking at, and we did a lot of soils data as well. Soil compaction, I didn't go into that. I was just focusing on the things that had value from an economic perspective, even though there's value in soil health. So when we were looking at our cotton lint yield, so 2 years of data, because it was a cotton peanut rotation, what we saw that was for no graze, there was no difference between that and February. It reduced a little bit in March, and then also a little bit in April, but really no significant, I mean, it was significant statistically, but not a huge drop in cotton production. And there was no change in peanut yield during those 2 years. So the really cool finding from this study was that we, with our NRCS, decided that April 1st, so that mid between March and April, was the date that those animals should be removed to keep in equip regulations. So we've actually applied that to our research projects. So, and like I said, we saw no differences in soil compaction or soil nutrient profiles in these 4 years from these different treatments as well. So that was a big thing, because when the first thing I get told whenever I talk about this is it's going to compact my soil. Now, this is in a sandy soil. I'm hoping to replicate this project in North Alabama on a more silty loam soil that would be a little bit more puggy than our soils in South Alabama. But I'm hopeful to find similar results with there. So just kind of wrapping up. So the big thing is, we want to focus on our small grains, legumes, forbs. They provide excellent forage yield and quality. And these are the same things. If you're in the cover crop world, these are the same things we're pushing for cover crops anyways, because they benefit soil health and they also benefit our animals by making them a good, high quality diet. So while ryegrass, and I mentioned this a little bit, is great, and it's kind of it's the center of our cool season grazing in the Southeast, especially if you're south of the fescue line, it produces a lot of root biomass that can really be difficult to plant into. So I don't suggest using that. It also overlaps, because it's later growing, with typically our cover crop planting. So typically in South Alabama, we're planting around May 1st. So we want to be done and have the field prep by May 1st and ready to go, and ryegrass overlaps with that. So our grazing initiation date, which really determines the economics of this, because how long our grazing season can be, because we're kind of have that hard stop in April to prep the field for planting, is really dependent on our planting date. So if we can try to get our cover crops planted before harvest, or harvest those fields that you're planning on doing this on earlier, it really benefits, because if we're planting Thanksgiving, it's going to be after New Year's before I can get into those fields. Now, I have that happen all the time, but really if I can plant like right now, it's the perfect time. I get good grazing, I can get on before Christmas. So we do want to have proper grazing. Just because these are annual systems doesn't mean that we can avoid them. We want to make sure that whoever's managing the cattle tries not to graze over 4 inches and utilizes rotational grazing management. If we can keep cattle out there in theory until the day you prep the field for planting, we're just going to be sacrificing that cover crop biomass. And depending on what your objectives are, as I mentioned, that might be a positive or a negative. And the longer the grazing season, the more economical it is for on the cattle side. We just may be losing some of that from the cover crop side. So it's an opportunity for our row crop producers to generate additional income and profit potential, especially when the market's really low. I think it's a really good opportunity for our livestock and our row crop producers to integrate. It's really good sustainability on the environmental side. And right now it's really sustainable on the economic side as well. It can lead to a profit opportunity, but also leads to a higher level of risk, as we mentioned. And management is key to efficiency, and increased profit potential. So, and that relationship between that row crop producer, the landowner, and the cattle producer. So here are some resources Ken pulled together. So the Southern Cover Crop Council is really active in doing some of this work as well. And many of our cover crop people there. And then I'm not familiar with the one from Iowa, but I looked at it and it seemed like a really good one on the lease side. So with that, I think, Ken, do you have any other comments you want to add?
I don't. I think you covered everything. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. That was a great presentation. I think the whole system is fascinating. I know UF here is doing a lot of work on it as well, looking at pretty much y'all are all working together, look at the same thing, the economic value of putting those cattle on that cropland. Does anyone in the audience have any questions right now for this presentation? Or we can go ahead and address those before we move on. Feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute. Give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay, if not, we'll just keep rolling. I see Matt has already shared his screen. Perfect. So Matt, I'll go ahead and throw it to you. And then also, Dr. Nathan Smith is on this meeting, I believe. So if you have anything to throw in there as well, Nathan, feel free to do that. So I'll let y'all take it away.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Can you hear me good?
Yes, you're good.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Yeah. So I get the opportunity of talking about how not to need a hay baler. This is the classic example where you raise your hand in a meeting and say, yeah, I'll cover that. And you get to thinking about it and you're like, well, this is going to be tougher than I thought. So yeah, I appreciate it. We're going to go through this. I started this presentation. Let's see. It's not advancing. There we are. So I started this off thinking about this from the perspective of, let's go deep into the economics and do some enterprising and things like that. And then I pivoted about 6 hours ago and decided to treat this more as kind of a thought process, talking to fellow agents across the country, southern region, and just to give some talking points to that question we get, I think, a lot maybe is, do I need to bale my own hay? Is it worth it? Quite honestly, I joked with my colleagues before everybody signed on. I said, effectively, my presentation is going to be one slide that says, how not to need a hay baler is just go buy your hay at the end of the day. But there's a lot more behind that, obviously, and especially when we're talking with farmers and producers and having the question. So, like I said, the overview of this, or the general sense of how I'm going to talk about this for the next 15, 20 minutes probably, is conversation starters. Understand that when you're talking to producers and they're asking that question, you want to give them options and not be a smart aleck like I was a second ago and say just go buy your hay. So understand that you're going to get the response more times than not, and I think we've all gotten that. Well, this is just the way we've always done it. Daddy baled his hay, I'm baling hay. We just enjoy doing it, which is fine. But to really understand and throw some numbers at it. And let me make this perfectly clear and state this with emphatic noise here. I'm not saying we don't need hay or we don't need hay balers. The purpose to what Dr. Dillard and Ken were just sharing, we do some plantings. We have annuals to cover some forage gaps, but there's always an armyworm infestation that knocks your forage out, or there's a drought like we're seeing in some parts of the country right now. So for sure, not saying we don't need a hay baler in general ag is where I'm coming from. It's just going to be kind of farm dependent. And this is an example last year showing in the dotted line. I think we all experienced that July into September hard drought that just never seemed to really give us any relief. There was a lot of hay being fed. I know in our state, in our part of the country, forage is pretty spotty. in a lot of places. So the importance of this talk, and what I keep beating a dead horse over, is that we need hay in our systems. We need that forage availability. We need that in case of insurance, if you will, to provide the feed for the animals. So obviously, machinery costs. Tell you a real story. I got a call probably 2 weeks ago, maybe three, from a farmer, a friend of mine, and he called me. He said, "Fisher, I need you to talk me off the ledge." And I said, "What's going on, bud?" He said, "Well, cattle prices are good, and I've always bought all my hay from a farmer down the road. But I'm thinking about starting to bale my own hay." And I had to tell him, I said, "Buddy, cow prices are good, but machinery does cost more than just the original purchase. So keep that in mind." I pulled some numbers here and just give some kind of reference. Trying to price used equipment or new equipment sometimes can be a moving target. So I went through Machinery Pete's database and did just some cursory looking through there. And I tried to be as colorblind as possible, especially with equipment, because I think we've seen a lot of short line manufacturers come online here with hay equipment and start challenging some of the more primary color manufacturers that we've had. But round baler, you're going to spend, you can spend as much as you want, really, but around 35,000 is what it looked like. Mower conditioner, 25,000. Of course, if you're in the hay baling operation, you're going to have tractors, rakes, tedder. You're going to have all that kind of underlying equipment. So to give kind of a reference point on that, I looked in the southern region at enterprise budgets and kind of got a ballpark number based off of those round bale hay operation enterprise budgets, and it looked like about to be about $225 an acre in cost for that crop, and that's just basically your variable. That's repairs and maintenance kind of stuff, not taking in other those cost factors. So the machinery conversation when we get these talks or these questions is obviously, if they don't already have the equipment, it's definitely something to really help them understand that a short-term purchase right now can have long-term cost down the road. So the other thing I want to hit on too is the fertility aspect. I think I talked about this the other week when I presented, but I'm big on looking at fertility differences and how those will impact across different enterprises. So I just ran some numbers, just real generic. I know it's not really a hard-nosed numbers here, but I broke it down to effectively warm season, small grain, and cool season, looking at your fertility costs and the differences there. So when I'm saying warm season, I mean Bermuda grass, Bahia, mostly perennial growth. We're looking at $286 an acre for hay production and fertility costs. And then, if you drop off to just pasture maintenance, basically, you're losing you're saving, sorry, not losing, saving $140 an acre. Small grain's about the same. Using our Ag Service Lab recommendations, they really didn't tinker with the nitrogen, whether it was hay production or pasture. Cool season, which, partial cool season perennial, we're talking fescue mainly, and your savings on cool season is right at a little over $30, $35 an acre. So that's an idea. That's something to explore. This is not hard and fast numbers. Like I said, these are just some calculations I ran. It's going to be dependent on the operation that you're dealing with, talking to, or trying to help make a decision with. Likewise, I mentioned a moment ago, looking at those machinery costs per acre, just to give you an idea on just looking more at the variable cost or direct costs that we see our budgets develop across the southern region. For hay production on cool seasons, I just ran for strict numbers just to look at. We were ranging in the range of $460 to $530 an acre. And then cool season budgets for the pasture side, you're $210 to $260 an acre. So you can see it's going to be about double the cost for that hay operation, and that's going to start bringing in your machinery, your herbicide, crop protection, labor, things like that. So when producers are asking if they want to bale their own hay or should they bale their own hay, I think it really comes down to that difference there in variable cost and what they can actually just go out in the open market and buy. Now, that being said, I was joking earlier when I said just go buy your hay instead of try and bale it yourself. Uh, the trying to get a good price on hay is one heck of a moving target. I think it's going to depend on a lot of things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But just to give you some idea, um, so USDA using quick stats, I was able to look at what the state reports based off the USDA state ag profile. Again, in the southern region, our farmers are telling USDA that they're marketing their hay anywhere from $115 a ton to $150 a ton. I'm pretty confident, at least I can speak for the producers I work with, that I very rarely have come across somebody in this part of the world that's marketing by the ton or buying by the ton. So that's why I have this little chart on the right hand side. It just helps give kind of a ballpark idea of where we are, various bale sizes, densities, and how that translates on a per bale basis. For example, like a 4x5, if you're marketing it at $200 a ton, that's roughly an $88 bale. So anyhow, that being said, so our farmers are telling USDA, or USDA is getting these numbers, and we're 115 to 150 a ton, and that's just grass hay. I'm not talking alfalfa. Those numbers are hard to come by. But you look at the Alabama Direct Report, which is about our closest report that I look at. Large rounds on that report, we're going for 197 for good quality Bermuda hay, and medium rounds for good quality Bermuda hay. We're 177 a ton. So there's obviously some gaps and some stretches in there. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm not surprised if you look at your market bulletin, Facebook Marketplace. You look, just on the side of the road, hay selling from anywhere from $35 a bale to whatever they're willing to pay at the upper limit, really. But we have a lot of that lower priced hay in the market, and the profit potential in there might be there, because I can honestly tell you I've seen a lot of broom straw getting baled for hay, and you can tell fertility has been an issue there. So it's something to think about. Like I said, when we talk about buying versus baling, it's that comparison of how you're gonna look at your cost structure and things like that. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So feed out management, this is a big one. At the end of the day, I know this should be being considered regardless if you're baling your own hay or if you're purchasing the hay. But it's a slide I think I've shared before, but it's kind of an interesting example of dollars lost in value of the hay crop itself. Looking at various storage methods and just simple math. Again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but $100 a ton hay, you're potentially saving yourself $31 a ton by just putting it in a barn versus ground storage, no cover. So it's important to keep that kind of thing in mind when we're doing that. So needs assessment. Well, obviously, I say needs assessment because I mentioned in the beginning of this, we need hay in our system. So the question becomes, what kind of hay do you need, and what are you going to do with it? There's an old saying I've heard from several fellows. Well, it beats a snowball. Well, that might beat a snowball, but that snowball might have cost you more than you really paid attention to, or if it was worth it. So things to think about when you're talking to producers. Forage sample. It's more than just color and smell. I don't care what anybody tells me. They can't tell me the TDN on a bale of hay by looking, smelling it, and looking at it. It's important to have that sample. And this goes whether you're baling your own hay or not. It's just a general recommendation, in my opinion. But I don't know many farmers that are going to buy a 50-pound bag of commodity blend feed and not have a tag on it telling them what the protein is and the energy and things like that. So for what the forage sample costs, it's well worth it. But the reason I'm hammering this is, more importantly, when we're purchasing hay as opposed to growing it ourselves, if you grew it yourself, you knew how you fertilized it. You know how it was, if it got rained on or how it was taken care of. But when you're buying hay out in the market, you don't know those things unless, for whatever chance you get, you can see how it's been taken care of. And then again, back to the feed sack analogy there. we're pretty intense on watching the cost and managing cost and inputs when it comes to concentrate feeds. But for some reason, when it comes to feeding hay or storing hay, we just throw it out there in a round bale grain and let it sit there until it's half rotten, and then we'll throw another bale on top of it. Understanding what your needs are up front when you're in the market to be purchasing hay is quite critical. So that way you can assure that you've got the right amount. And then this is getting into Dr. Dillard's world a little bit, but I mean, honestly, grazing and forage plans. I mean, the easiest way to put pounds on an animal is to let them eat the grass themselves, if they're getting the proper nutrition. And that comes down to cost management. I mean, it really, a good grazing forage plan bridges the gap between the agronomic and the economic, in my opinion, and it pays off dividends in the long run. So back to the whole, we need hay in our system. I think we can all agree that we've seen operations they've got too many mouths to feed. They're trying to do more than the carrying capacity or the ground that they've got, stocking rate they've got. So it's important to have that understanding when it comes to that. So in the wrap up, I'm going to be early, but we got plenty of time for all the questions we've been getting, right, Hannah? In the wrap up, so the thing to think about, should I bale my own hay? Well, first and foremost, I think it goes without saying that the majority of our clientele are going to have, we're going to have off-farm jobs. Off-farm jobs require sometimes late nights, and sometimes it's not going to allow you to put up a good crop of hay, doing whether it's weather issues, mechanical issues. There's only so many hours in the day, and you need to understand the cost of your labor coming into that enterprise as well. Quality control. As I mentioned a minute ago with the forage sampling, it's certainly a requirement, I would say, when you're in the open market purchasing hay. I've worked with some custom hay baling operations and shared with them that I said, if you really want to differentiate yourself in the market right now, if you can provide documentation of your soil sampling and your fertility fertilizer program, and then on top of that, offer a soil hay sample. With that, I said you're going to be up above beyond what the market's really bringing right now. So it's important to have that quality control when you are the purchaser of the hay. So I think the whole title of this is not how not to need a hay baler, but let's just be honest with you. If you have the ground, or if your producer has the ground and they have the time and they have the kids, well, let's just call it free labor, and they need to get them off the iPad or whatever, and you want to run a custom hay operation, absolutely. Again, this is not degrading the cost of hay production. This is simply a conversation that we can have with producers if it's worth it, if I should, and those if statements are hard. Because there's a lot of behavioral things in there. I love the phrase. I don't know who to attribute it to. I've heard it attributed to probably half a dozen different people, but recreational hay baling. I'm fully aware that I have a relative, I'd say illness, sickness, whatnot. I do enjoy baling hay. I mean, as bad as it sounds, I will be, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more allergies, and I'll be in a tractor just looking like I've watched the final scene of Lonesome Dove. My eyes are all welled up and scratchy and itchy, and tears are coming down. So I admit it, I enjoy it. So there's certainly a amount of that you're going to have to understand when you're talking to some of these people, that it's not all dollars and cents in business. Sometimes there is some mental health aspects and non-tangibles. Lastly, and I'm going to, I think, wrap up early, is think about it from, this does provide you flexibility. I was lucky enough to talk to Dr. Smith's class on Monday about cropping systems around forages, and we had a student ask in there at the end. He said, "Well, how do I know if I need to bale my own hay or not?" And I just started laughing because I was like, "Well, funny enough, I'll be talking about this on Wednesday." And Dr. Smith made the point. He said, "Well, you tell us, what do you think?" Kind of put it back on the students. Easiest way to answer a question sometimes. And the students, "Well, what if I had a field that I couldn't graze and the grass is growing?" And that's a great point. If you already have, or if you already have the equipment, one student said. So we know that this equipment sits on the farm, and sometimes it's already there. It just might not have been used in several years. There is flexibility in the fact of having it if it makes good sense, because there are opportunities to harvest some grass or some forage for the winter months or the drought months. With that, that was my best execution of how not to need a hay baler. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free. This is my contact information, email, cell phone. I want to give a huge thanks to Max and that Auburn crew for hosting us down. We were joking, it was 10 months ago that put all this together. I think it's been, from my experience, been real enjoyable, and I appreciate it. And with that, Hannah, we've got a whole 9 minutes to answer all these questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll second that. Thanks to the Auburn team for hosting us earlier this year and kind of sparking all of these sessions and these topics. I know personally I've learned a lot from all of you, and it's just been great to kind of lean on each other in these topics because not one of us can do all of this all of the time. So it's been really nice to um, do this with everyone. And I hope you as attendees have gotten quite a bit out of it that you can take back to your producers. Does anybody have, that's all for our presentations today. Does anybody have any questions for any of our presenters? Any discussion points? Again, feel free to throw them in the chat, or you're free to unmute yourself as well. Not a very talkative group today. That just means y'all did a really good job and there's no questions. Okay, well, we'll just cut it early and give everybody back 8 minutes to their day. Thank you again to our presenters for being on today. I will say to everyone, the survey is in the chat, so if you don't mind, please take that. I know I've asked y'all to take a lot of surveys, but I promise it's for the greater good, and we really appreciate y'all taking the time to take those. Thank you again to our presenters, and we will see you all hopefully next week for our last and final session. We're going to be talking about economics behind reproduction strategies and things of that nature. So with that, I'll let everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank y'all.